Warning. This episode contains references to extreme violence. Please use discretion when listening.
When I feed the hungry, they call me a saint. When I ask why they have no food, they call me a communist. Archbishop Helder Camara.
In the 1980s in El Salvador, the most common way to get your news was on the radio. Everyone listened to the radio all the time. Some people used it to listen to religious sermons and hymns. Others just wanted the latest soccer scores. But on the afternoon of March 24th, 1980, there was a radio story that stopped the whole world in its tracks.
Shortly before he was killed at the altar, Romero spoke the words that may have cost him his life. In the name of God and his suffering people, stop the repression, he implored. He urged soldiers to disobey orders that ran contrary to the word of God. He was enormously popular, and he was shot to death. No one has been brought to justice.
Monseñor Oscar Arnulfo Romero had been shot and killed. Father Benito Tovar was in the middle of dinner with a group of priests when he heard the news.
Estábamos ni a media cena cuando llegó corriendo el sacristán. Padre, ¿qué pasó? Ahí en la radio están diciendo que acaban de matar a Monseñor Romero. ¿Cómo te pones a creer vos? Estás loco, no sé qué. ¿Cómo no? Oigan, voy a traer la radio.
Me grita, han matado a Monseñor, pero yo solo le entendí, ¿qué pasa? Tranquila, ¿a quién han matado?
Marisa de Martinez got the news from her kid's nanny, panicking in the kitchen. The nanny was talking so fast, Marisa couldn't understand what she was saying. Who's dead? Who did they kill?
Oiga. Y me quedo helada oyendo, acaban de asesinar a Monseñor Romero. Fue verdaderamente un masazo,
Stunned, Marisa walked out of her house and saw people screaming, falling to their knees in the street.
Recuerdo haber visto a una señora arrodillada en el pavimento con los brazos levantados diciendo, nos mataron a nuestro profeta. Descompuesta, ¿verdad?
Cold with shock and grief, Marisa waited for her husband to come home. All they could do was hold each other and cry.
Solo nos abrazamos a llorar y a expresar, decir, que hijo de puta, lo mataron.
Ahí estaba pescando, ya con mi papá. Y sonó en la radio. Acaban de asesinar a...
David was only 8 years old when he heard the news. He was out fishing with his dad. They got down on their knees and prayed in the river.
Sí, los dos nos hincamos a rezar.
El día que lo asesinaron, yo estaba en mi casa.
And Don Oscar lived right near the hospital where Monseñor was shot, and he had to go see for himself.
Y llegó y me dijo, Oscar, vení, ¿qué pasa? Acaban de matar a Monseñor. ¿A dónde? Le dije yo, allí en la capilla. Y salí corriendo.
By the time he arrived, all that was left was a trail of blood.
Cuando vine ya se lo habían llevado, pero había un reguero de sangre aquí. Estaba sangre, gotas de sangre por todos lados. Y realmente sí me molió realmente.
The news of Oscar's death stunned the nation and beyond. In the White House, President Jimmy Carter was handed a memo. In the Vatican, the Pope was pulled aside by an advisor. All over the globe, the death of this man was heard and felt. As the country went into mourning, preparations were made for Monseñor Romero's funeral. He was to be buried beneath the cathedral in the center of San Salvador in just 6 days. All over the country, people began a pilgrimage to the capital to pay their final respects to Monseñor Romero. And what happened at the funeral? Nobody saw it coming. I talked to several people who witnessed the funeral firsthand and described it as one of the worst days of their lives. I'm Jasmine Romero, and this is Sacred Scandal Season 3, Nation of Saints. This is Episode 2, The Funeral. On the first days of my trip to El Salvador, I met up with a man named Roberto Valencia, a local journalist who worked as my fixer, and I asked him to take me to the main cathedral. I wanted to see for myself what this famous place looked like. It's in the heart of downtown San Salvador. But to get to the cathedral, you have to get through El Mercado Central, a giant open-air market. The streets are so crowded, we have to bob and weave to get through. I keep an eye out for Roberto's striped polo shirt so I don't lose him in the crowd. There are vendors on both sides of the street selling everything that you can possibly imagine. Batteries and cabbages and t-shirts, and guys on loudspeakers trying to get your attention.
The sound of El Salvador, real El Salvador.
This is the sound of El Salvador, Roberto says. The real El Salvador. Roberto makes quick lefts and rights navigating the maze, and then finally we break through the noise. The cathedral is beautiful. It's a Spanish-style monument that stands about 10 stories high. From where I'm standing, I can see walls and walls of stained glass windows, framed by brown arches, and its domed roof sits high above the surrounding buildings, imposing and regal. It's surrounded by a big open plaza, about half the size of a football field. It's a place meant for Salvadorans to gather and celebrate. All over the square there are families, children. There's a lot of pigeons, and the kids are running through the pigeons trying to catch them, scare them off. The area is by far the most touristy and revered area in the country. It's where you can find the most important buildings in San Salvador, monuments to the government and the church. It seems only fitting that Monsignor Romero should be laid to rest here, in a cathedral that towers over all the surrounding buildings. But below the cathedral is where I really want to go. Beneath the bustle of the plaza and the worshipers in the church, down in the catacombs. It's here that I find Oscar's tomb. The pillars around this room each have a mosaic of a fallen priest. Monsignor Romero's is in the center. It's a bronze or black metal tomb with 4 pillars. It's a mausoleum. In the center of this silent marble room is Monsignor Romero's grave. It's topped with a metal cast of his body. You can clearly see the lines of his face. It's like a shroud of bronze is draped over him. The plan for Oscar Romero's funeral was simple. A mass would be held, mourners would come and pay their respects, and by sundown, his body would be lowered into a prepared grave in the back of the cathedral. Priests from around the world flew in to attend the ceremony. Bishops from as far as Belgium, Ireland, the UK, and neighboring countries like Panama, Peru, and Ecuador all came to show their support for their fallen brother. Speakers were set up on the cathedral steps so that anyone who couldn't fit inside could hear the homily. The cathedral itself only holds about 2,000 people, and pews were maxed out early in the day. By the time the ceremony started, the plaza was full to the brim. It's hard to estimate how many people were actually there.
Eran filas interminables de gente. dándole la última despedida a Monseñor, que estaba ya en su ataúd, pues embalsamado, ¿verdad?
The lowest numbers I've seen put it around 50,000. Others say it was 3 times that many. Marisa de Martinez remembers attending the funeral with her family.
Estamos una multitud que yo no sé calcular en cuánto, pero miles de gente, toda la plaza llena.
Lines of thousands and thousands and thousands of people. The plaza was packed to the gills. I've seen pictures from that day, and it really is astounding to look at. It's one giant mass, everyone shoulder to shoulder. The only way you can tell it's people and not ants is because of the occasional umbrellas that punctuate the crowd. The plaza has no shade, and it was a particularly hot day. Some had come in groups with their entire church congregation. Others had come with just their families. You can see kids in the crowd on their parents' shoulders. Some were carrying banners or posters with Oscar Romero's face on them. The tone is somber, mournful. Father James Connor, a Jesuit priest from Philadelphia, wrote a description of that day. Here's an actor reading his account.
The funeral ceremony started calmly on a beautiful but hot day. The entire plaza was filled in of more than 100,000 persons, and thousands more spilled over into the side streets leading to it. Many of them listening to a radio broadcast of the event on their transistor radios. All went peacefully through a succession of prayers, readings, hymns, until the moment in his homily when the Mexican cardinal began to praise Archbishop Romero as a man of peace and a foe of violence.
The crowd was already on edge. Everyone was aware that this wasn't a regular funeral. Oscar Romero didn't just die. He was murdered, killed in cold blood for his beliefs. And here was a gathering of thousands of people who were openly showing support of those beliefs. But everyone assumes that there's safety in numbers, that respect will be shown at this somber moment. There's a video of the moment that the Mexican cardinal notices that something is wrong. His eyes dart up, suddenly wide with fear. Don Oscar, the man who saw the trail of blood after Oscar's murder, was at the funeral. He was outside, in the crowd with his wife, when he heard the sound.
Y de repente, pum, pum, y el traqueteo y las bombas por un lado, por otro, y nosotros no habíamos qué hacer, ni no habíamos ni por dónde correr.
A bomb. Some say it was just a smoke bomb. Others insist that it was a low-grade explosive. What's clear is that there was an explosion in the northwest corner of the plaza. News cameras from all over the world broadcast the moment live. In the footage, you can see the panic ripple through the crowd. The cardinal tries to calm them down, but it's too late.
Entonces la gente hace esto, correr. Pero ahí no podías correr si estabas así. Era empujarse, unos caídos, la gente pasando encima de otros, no sabíamos qué iba a pasar.
People try to run, but it's impossible with the size of the crowds. They're pushing, shoving, trying to flee. Don Oscar, who was near the site of the explosion, grabbed his wife and ran for the nearest cover.
Entonces salimos. Todavía cuando salí me encontré a una niñita así, llorando. Se había quedado sola. Y tu mamá, le dije, sin saber qué se hizo. Entonces yo la agarré.
A little girl was separated from her mother and was standing in the middle of the crowd alone. Don Oscar yanked her up and threw her over his shoulder.
Y todavía mi mujer me dijo, mira, mi hijo, si apenas nos vamos a salvar nosotros. Mírale, o nos salvamos todos o no nos vamos a salvar ninguno, le dije yo. Salí en la esquina, en esa esquina, explotó una bomba, ¿verdad? Y todavía nos logramos ir a un lado.
Don Oscar took cover in a shop near the square. The shop owner assured him that he would find the girl's mother and get her back to safety. To this day, he has no idea who the little girl was or what happened to her. Outside, the thousands of mourners tried to vacate the square, but the exits were few. Iron barricades had been put up in the days prior to try to help with crowd control. But instead of helping, they pinched the crowd into a funnel. Tens of thousands try to push their way through an opening the size of 2 double doors. People start falling, their faces lost in the sea of panicked mourners. And that's when the shooting starts.
Y del Palacio Nacional empiezan a disparar. De una manera así, a quien le cayera, ¿verdad?
Marisa says sharpshooters, armed with military rifles, were shooting into the crowd from the windows and the roof of the National Palace.
Había gente de la guerrilla armada. Se apertrechan entre paredes y todo para disparar al palacio. Y imagínate, una multitud en la que no puedes correr.
Mourners throw themselves on the ground, ducking the bullets. But members of the crowd are armed too. They pull out their own guns and shoot back. It's a cacophony of screams, gunshots, and chaos. Marisa made a dash for the cathedral. 6,000 people pushed their way in, far beyond the capacity for the space. The tightly packed bodies radiated heat through the building.
En catedral la gente se ahogaba y pidieron a todos los hombres que se quitaran las camisas y las hicieran ventiladores.
Men take off their shirts and wave them around their heads like makeshift fans. An elderly man in the crowd starts losing consciousness and is hoisted up. The crowd passes his body forward, trying to get him air. Father Connor saw it all from the pulpit. Here's a reading of his account.
As one of the concelebrating priests, I had been inside the cathedral from the start. Now, I had watched the terrified mob push through the doors until every inch of space was filled. Looking about me, I suddenly realized that, aside from the nuns, priests, and bishops, the mourners were the poor and the powerless of El Salvador. The bomb explosions grew closer and more frequent until the cathedral began to shudder. Would the whole edifice collapse? Or would a machine gunner appear in a doorway to strafe the crowd? We lived through that horror of bombs, bullets, and panic. Now dead bodies were being carried into the cathedral from outside for nearly 2 hours. At certain moments, one could not help wondering if we would all be killed. Eventually, the bombing and shooting subsided.
By the end of the day, the only people remaining in the plaza were the dead. Everyone who could escape had long gone. But there were still signs of what had happened everywhere. Burned out cars still smoking. And the shoes. The mountains of shoes. Here's Marisa.
Era un volcán así de zapatos que se recogió ahí y la gente llegaba a buscar sus zapatos. Bueno, son ya anécdotas, pero situaciones horribles que se han vivido aquí.
Hundreds of sandals, loafers, sneakers, and pumps that had fallen off of people's feet as they ran for safety. The shoes were piled into the center of the square, and for days, people came back looking for their lost footwear. It's hard to say exactly how many died that day. The government's official tally was somewhere around 40. The most common cause of death being trampled or suffocated in the crowd. But eyewitness accounts put the number in the hundreds. According to the government's official statement, there were never any sharpshooters on the roof of the National Palace either. Like a lot of things around this time, what you believe depends on what side you're on. And there were very clear sides. On one side was the right-wing military government, who wanted to hold on to the power they'd had for centuries. And on the other, those activist groups who we mentioned in the last episode, union organizers, campesinos, teachers, the ones who had been protesting for better wages and living conditions. After decades of being ignored, they joined together and formed a military group called the Farabundo Martí National Liberation Front, the FMLN. 7 months after this funeral, they declared war on the government. So I'm going to take you back for a second to understand why and how we got to this point. That's after the break. To understand why Oscar Romero's death is so central to the El Salvador story, we have to zoom out. Because what's happening in El Salvador around this time, it's happening all across Latin America. For most of the 70s and 80s, Latin America was controlled by a small group of strongmen who wielded their power viciously. Right-wing dictators who were supported by the US, both financially and politically. Trujillo in the Dominican Republic, Videla in Argentina, Pinochet in Chile. Throw a dart on a map of Latin America, and it's likely that the US put a dictator there. El Salvador was no different. For most of its existence, El Salvador has been ruled by military dictatorships. Occasionally, those dictators would have a little election to give the appearance of democracy. But everyone knew those elections were rigged.
They still say the elections are a farce.
We believed that the elections in this country were some form of solution, but the parties at this moment who are participating in these elections don't represent any kind of alternative for the people.
That was the case for another Romero in this story, General Carlos Humberto Romero. No, he's not related to the priest or to me. In 1977, General Romero ran for president on a right-wing anti-communist platform and won with a whopping 67% of the vote. Never mind that most of the population couldn't read and that military personnel were stationed at polling places to remind people who to vote for. When the results of the election came in, people in the country were pissed. A protest against the fraudulent election was organized, mostly by university students.
Libertad para Numas Escobar! Libertad para José Oscar López!
President Romero's response was swift and ruthless.
Vivíamos bajo la bota militar y se cometen crímenes de lesa humanidad. Viví todo eso con rabia, con cólera, con amargura, ver cómo el cambio en este país tenía una posición brutal, ¿verdad?
That's Marisa de Martínez again. She remembers the 70s as being a time of harsh repression by the military. Marisa was raised by a middle-class family and grew up with limited knowledge of the politics of the country. It wasn't until she was a teenager and took a trip to the countryside that she really understood how bad things were.
Campesinos que estaban realmente aquí viviendo bajo unas estructuras de injusticia inhumanas.
What she saw were people starving, field workers cutting cane and harvesting coffee in the tropical sun, and going home with a handful of beans. When she asked her father why these people had so little, he had a very clear answer for her.
porque sí, son haraganes, son alcohólicos, la mayoría de hombres, son gente que además anda con ideas comunistas, que han venido de Cuba, que por ahí viene la gente que los quieren organizar, ¿verdad?
The people are poor because they are lazy or alcoholics. And if they're trying to change anything, it's because they're communists. This was a very common sentiment among the country's wealthy elite, that all the protests, all the calls for social justice and equality were just the work of foreign communists. And they weren't totally wrong. Not about the lazy and alcoholics part, that's obviously awful. But there were communists who were organizing in El Salvador. In the late 1970s, the Communist Party was one of the groups advocating for change in El Salvador. It wasn't the only group. There were also labor unions and teachers and human rights activists. But for obvious reasons, the Communist Party took a lot of the heat for the protests happening around the country. It's amidst all of this that Oscar Romero becomes Archbishop. And I mean that literally. Within the span of 8 days, General Romero is named president, Oscar Romero is named Archbishop, and students are gunned down at the protests in the plaza. It was a hell of a week. The Catholic Church was right in the middle of all of this. Historian Eileen Markey calls El Salvador a three-legged stool. It's a society that's held up by 3 pillars: the rich, who hold all the power, the military, who protect the rich, and the church, who placate the poor. With the brewing unrest, the rich and the military looked to the church to calm everyone down, like normal, to tell the poor to get back in their place and wait for their reward in the afterlife. But that's not what happened. The church had changed. A new idea had taken root within the priests of Latin America: liberation theology. This idea that the church should serve the poor, and more than that it should teach the poor to question their circumstances. This movement threatened the whole social order in El Salvador. The three-legged stool was hobbling because the rich were doing their part and the military was doing its part, but now the church wasn't cooperating. Priests telling the poor to question their circumstances, and communists organizing in the country, all of this threatened to knock the stool over. The rich needed an archbishop who could calm things down, someone who was happy to keep things status quo, someone like Oscar Romero. Oscar was chosen to be archbishop specifically because he was a conservative and reserved priest. So he comes into those tumultuous 8 days thinking that he's going to lay low. But his mentor had other ideas. Here's Marisa again.
Entonces, con Rutilio traían una amistad en la que yo pienso que Rutilio sensibilizaba muchísimo a Monseñor sobre la situación de los campesinos.
Rutilio Grande was a Jesuit priest from a small rural town north of the capital. He's the son of field workers and became a parish priest in Aguilares, the same community that raised him. He was also Oscar Romero's mentor and close friend.
Y tenían una relación, cuentan la gente que vivía en el seminario, que cuando Rutilio se quedaba ahí, lo veían caminar por más de 1 hora, a los dos ellos conversando en los pasillos del edificio del seminario.
Rutilio and Oscar had kind of an odd couple friendship. Rutilio was this passionate defender of the poor. He insisted that the church must be a leader in getting the poor out of poverty. But Oscar disagreed. He thought it wasn't right for priests to be political actors, that they should leave those things up to the government. They would often spend hours walking around and debating these points. So when Oscar was named archbishop, Rutilio went to his friend one last time and asked him to use his new position of power to speak out against the injustices happening across the nation. Oscar remained silent. But then, something happened that changed Oscar and his trajectory. That's after the break. March 12th, 1977. 2 weeks after Oscar Romero is named Archbishop. Rutilio Grande is driving back to his parish after visiting a local town, and he's traveling with a 72-year-old man and a 15-year-old boy. It was mid-afternoon, and the trio was driving in a truck down a dusty country road when the car was ambushed by gunfire. The truck veers off the road and flips upside down into a ditch. And the truck is indiscriminately sprayed with bullets. All three died of multiple gunshot wounds.
Fue un golpe verdaderamente que los sacudió.
Marisa de Martinez again. In the capital, Oscar is immediately notified and rushes to his fallen friend's side. But when he arrives, nobody wants him there. Marisa knows, because she was in the room.
Yo recuerdo que cuando llegó a Aguilares, donde la gente estaba conmovida con el cadáver de Rutilio, llega el arzobispo y la gente, el murmullo, a mí me llamó eso la atención. ¿Y a qué viene ese? ¿Y ese ahora qué quiere saber?
The people of Rutilio's parish whisper, "What's he doing here?" Whatever he has to say, it's too little and too late. And Oscar realizes that they're right. Something has to change.
Llama a los jesuitas y les pide que si pueden pasar a un salón detrás del altar con él. Y nos cuentan los jesuitas que Romero humildemente les dice, díganme qué tengo que hacer.
He calls a meeting with Rutilio's Jesuit brothers and asks them, "What should I do?" Out of that meeting comes an unprecedented idea, one that changed the course of Oscar's future and officially declared what side he was on.
La misa única, ¿no? Eso fue muy impactante, muy, muy impactante.
La Misa Única, one mass for the entire country. Oscar tells the priests across the nation that their services this week are canceled. There will be one sermon given this week, he says, mine, a funeral mass for my friend, Rutilio Grande. This has literally never been done before.
Y yo quiero agradecer aquí en público a todos estos queridos sacerdotes. Muchos de ellos corren el peligro hasta la máxima inmolación del Padre Grande. El que toca a uno de mis sacerdotes, a mí me toca.
In his mass, he tells the world that he stands behind the priests of his country. All of them. And with this move, Oscar puts himself directly in the crosshairs of the oligarchy and the military. Everyone would be listening to this sermon. The campesinos, the rich, the powerful, the violent.
Le trajo a Romero ya ponerlo en la mirilla del poder político y económico de aquí.
Over the next 3 years, priests were systematically murdered in El Salvador.
Y empiezan entonces a atacar fuertemente a los sacerdotes y total llegaron a 5 o 6 sacerdotes asesinados. No, la defensa que hacían los poderosos de su poder para no perder el poder era una defensa criminal.
Priests were picked off one by one, ambushed, kidnapped, murdered. Many on the right claimed that the priests were communists and that they wanted a communist revolution. that they were helping the leftists plot to overthrow the government. But those who lived among the priests are adamant that this wasn't the case. Marisa remembers the case of a young priest named Neto Barrera, who she was friendly with, and who had even attended her wedding.
Neto Barrera era un sacerdote joven, fogoso e indignado con todas estas situaciones, ¿verdad? Entonces era, digamos, un formador de líderes obreros para la defensa de sus intereses.
Neto had been helping a local labor union get organized, counseling their leaders. One night, as he slept in his parish,
Lo capturaron, lo torturaron, lo mataron.
Neto was kidnapped, tortured, and killed. To cover up their crimes, those who had taken him left his body in a compromising position.
Lo dieron por muerto en una fingida refriega. El padre Neto fue encontrado muerto de balas, pero que, según conjeturas, ya fue llevado muerto a aquel lugar.
His body was placed on the roof of a communist stronghold and posed with a gun to make it look like he had been killed in a shootout with officials. But Oscar Romero refused to parrot that story. The Archbishop told the public that when he saw Neto's body, it was covered in cigarette burns and bruises on his neck and wrists. That Neto was no combatant, that he was clearly murdered. Over and over again, priests all around the country were targeted and gunned down with impunity. It was an organized and systematic assassination of priest after priest, leading up to the most important one, Archbishop Oscar Romero. But who was giving the orders to kill these priests? Who would be so bold as to kill holy men in broad daylight? And then to bomb a funeral while tens of thousands mourned? Most Salvadorans agree that this falls on the shoulders of one man.
El autor intelectual es el mayor Roberto D'Aubuisson.
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 Major Roberto D'Aubuisson.
Sí, le necesito preguntar nomás para tenerlo claro, ¿quién era Roberto a usted?
Además de ser mi hermano.
Marisa's brother. That's on the next episode of Sacred Scandal, Nation of Saints. Sacred Scandal, Nation of Saints is a production of AHA Podcasts in partnership with iHeart's My Cultura podcast network and is hosted and written by me, Jasmine Romero. Produced by Jasmine Romero with help from Jorge Just, Reynolds Gutierrez, and Álvaro Céspedes. Research and reporting by Jasmine Romero. Edited by Zaire Quevedo, Jorge Just, and Rose Reed. Nation of Saints was recorded in New York City at the Relic Room with engineering by Sam Baer. Mixing and sound design by Pachi Quiñones. Original music by Golden Minds, Darko and Aime, based on Patrick Hart's original composition. Fact-checking by Erendira Aquino Ayala. Executive producers are Carmen Graterol, Isaac Lee, Rose Reed, and Nando Villa. Our executive producers at iHeart are Giselle Bances and Arlene Santana. Sacred Scandal was created by Melanie Bartley and Paula Barros. For more podcasts, go to the iHeart Radio app or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.